Okay, now we're going to focus our attention on metacognitive reflection. So in order to talk about reflection, we want to think about the self-regulation process in general. So for academic self-regulation, the first thing that students need to ask themselves is, what am I trying to achieve? And that really has to fall under the umbrella of setting goals. Then they will need to know whether or not they have achieved their goal. This sounds kind of familiar, right? It looks a little bit like backwards design. It's helping students think about the end first. And when the students are thinking about whether or not they've achieved their goal, they should be thinking about what learning strategies are they using to help them get there, just like we think about what teaching strategies that we will use. So it's kind of a parallel process to the teaching, part of the, learning process. And then we need to know whether or not students have to engage in the, well, how am I doing? So I said I wanted to get an A in this course and I wanted to learn A, B, and C. How am I progressing? So I have to engage in a self-reflection process. And then, of course, if it's not going well, you're going to readjust and make modifications. And if it is going well, you're going to celebrate and continue on the path. So that's really what happens during the academic self-regulation process. So let's turn our attention to that reflective piece of this process. We want to ask ourselves, or we want to get students to ask themselves rather, questions such as, am I spending enough time studying? What strategies are working really well for me? What strategies aren't working so well for me? So for instance, if a student is spending a lot of time studying for an exam and they're not getting the grade or learning the content that they wanted to learn at the level that they had hoped, then maybe their study strategies aren't on target. Are they using effective strategies such as quizzing themselves, teaching others, or are they relying on less effective strategies like reviewing and just looking over notes? So basically the idea here is we ask students to engage in the self-reflection so that they can identify strategies to keep them on the path or get them back on track if they have kind of fallen off the path a little. Now, let's talk a little bit about how accurate student assessments are, because this is an important part of the equation. If we're asking students to engage in self-assessment, we need to have some level of confidence that they're going to be effective at doing so. Well, unfortunately, there is some evidence out there that contradicts that hypothesis. Basically, the evidence says that students tend to have what's called an illusion of competence, where they often feel overconfident. And this is particularly the case when they're engaged in activities that are not supported by the research. So if you look at your screen, you're going to see the yellow bar represents repeated studying. And basically what happened in this study by Karpik and Butler is that they were looking at how effective were students if they used different kinds of studying approaches. One study approach was to review their notes, and that's the repeated studying. And you can see here that they did not perform super well, in terms of regular verbatim questions or inference questions. And yet, when you look at the metacognitive prediction, which is all the way on the right-hand side, what this is tapping into is a question that asks students, so how well do you think you learned this content by using this strategy? And these students were the most confident. And that is problematic because if you're feeling competent and comfortable with the content, you're probably going to stop studying too soon. So this is really the biggest problem with overconfidence. And when students rely on strategies such as reviewing their notes, it's not surprising that they start to feel overconfident, because the more you look at it, the more familiar it is. But familiarity is not equal to learning. So just because something looks familiar doesn't mean that you've really grasped the concepts. So we do need to have like a word of caution when we're asking students to engage in self-assessment. We want to help them make accurate predictions and assessments of where they are. So what kind of self-reflective techniques can we encourage students to use, and how can we try to make sure that they're more accurate in their assessments? So this is a famous quote from John Dewey: we do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. So action and doing is powerful, but that reflective process afterwards, even more powerful, really, in terms of learning. Well, there are a couple of different types of feedback that students can look to when they are trying to, kind of find out how they're doing and whether or not they're on track. Cognitive feedback happens while they're in the process of completing an assignment or studying for an exam. Outcome feedback happens after they get the official grade and feedback on their product. And we want students to engage, obviously, in both, both channels of feedback. and using that feedback to really help determine whether or not you are on or off track. Clearly, if we can get students doing this during the cognitive feedback phase, then that's going to increase the chances of them meeting with success on the product, so there won't be as much learning to do after they receive the grade. So one approach we can get students to use, and this can happen as a cognitive feedback approach, during, you can ask students to do that self-assessment of their learning outcomes. So many chapters and textbooks have learning outcomes already posted. If not, they should at least be posted within your course of, on the syllabus. And students can start to say, okay, well, at the end of the semester, I'm supposed to be able to, boom, 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 am I really at that place? And then maybe in this module or with this chapter, I'm supposed to be able to, boom, 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 boom. How am I progressing? Have I mastered those learning outcomes? Do I have a lot of work to do yet? That can help students kind of get a sense of whether they're on track or off track. Now, to increase the accuracy of the self-assessments, we want to try to encourage students to use external standards whenever possible. So we may want them to look at, for instance, a rubric. Maybe they want to start engaging in a self-assessment before the assignment. I think sometimes students think that rubrics are just for the teacher to use to grade, but students can actually go through that rubric to see, well, where do I think I fall and how might I strengthen this paper or project or presentation? We also can look, we as faculty can provide some models so that students can have something to compare their work to see if they are on or off track. So when students are working on homework and other assignments, they really need to get a sense of whether they're on track, and they're going to have to engage in some of the self-reflective activities I had just mentioned. So what is the purpose of the assignment? How far along am I? Not just in terms of completing, but in terms of the quality of learning along the way. So when engaged in this process, there are several different questions students might ask themselves. So I'll just give you a minute or so to read the different examples up on your screen. So as faculty, we can provide them with these kinds of questions or prompts. We may even want to grade a reflective activity because that will then make it more likely that they put more effort into the process. So we want to also provide students with ways to monitor their study progress. Now, some of this might be counted, so for instance, we might have quizzes that will give them a sense of whether they're on track to do well on a bigger exam. And other strategies might be not graded, but might be good tools for them to use while they're studying. So for instance, flashcards. Are they able to pose a question on one side, write the answer on the other, and then when they test themselves, are they able to really give comprehensive, thorough responses? Are they getting all the main points? Are they missing anything? Things of that nature. The SQ3R approach that we talked about in the reading section, survey, question, read, recite, review. Well, that recite, the second R, is an opportunity for students to kind of assess, did I get what I just read or did I not get? And when I go back over the review, that'll be the opportunity for me to know whether or not I captured that information accurately or not. And when we teach others, others will often ask us questions, and if we're able to confidently and accurately answer those questions, that makes it easier for us to know whether or not we're on the right track. Now, an outcome method that we can use, outcome feedback, is a post-exam reflection. So as faculty, we might want to ask students to engage in this. And this could be, after an exam. So look at your exam in an intense kind of way, in-depthly, taking apart the different components, looking for where the errors might have been. And then try to determine, well, where did I go awry with my studying? Did you forget to study a certain section? Were you studying the wrong content? Did you misunderstand while you were studying? Or were you not, were you too anxious or something during the exam itself and you didn't clearly read the question? So by kind of teasing out where the problems lie can help you identify what interventions will support you in meeting with success the next time. Now, as I mentioned before, if we want students to take these reflection activities seriously, we may want to assign a grade to them. And I know this can be challenging because some faculty find it hard or difficult to give a grade to a reflective activity, but we certainly can still grade the assignment. It may not be based on content as much as thoroughness and answering all of the questions in an accurate way, because we don't really know what their internal process is. So it's not like we're looking for a certain content or right answer, but we're looking for them to engage in a process. So I would say if you're going to give reflective assignments, you want to make sure they're process-based grades where they thoroughly answered all the questions and identified action plans, and then maybe the next time they reported back on whether they utilized those new strategies or not. All right, so that's some strategies to get students engaged in the metacognitive reflection, and I hope that that helps you help your students develop this really important skill set.